Okay, so before I get into this video, this is a disclaimer because I just want to let you know, I just want to be upfront with you that this is definitely going to be one of the more rambling of my videos. Like, I definitely have that tendency, and when it comes to this topic in particular, I mean, I'm putting rabbit hole in the title because that's what it is. I mean, I think a rabbit hole, by definition, is this long, weird story, and that's what this is going to be. And it's definitely going to be a long video probably, so just want to let you know that. And because of its nature, it's kind of difficult to organize, so I'm just going to do my best and sort of lead you through a journey that I had online that I thought was of interest. And like in the last video that I made, it led me to this one site which I thought was pretty interesting, and it led me to a whole lot of information which I thought was really interesting, which I felt like sharing. Okay, and basically what started this whole process or journey was I was listening to this video, which I'm not going to give too many details about, but basically this person on YouTube basically just said something about how let's see, I don't want to get too political to turn you off right away, but basically something about the Act of 1871 and about how at this current time there were rumors, unconfirmed rumors, that Trump could maybe, something about Trump and something about going to the Act of 1871 and about this country not really being a country, technically speaking, but actually being a corporation since 1871, and that Trump could somehow like undo that or go back to the status of being a legitimate nation or something like that. And I'm not saying necessarily that that's accurate or that that's not accurate, but when I heard that, I was just intrigued. And I've recently had this sort of interest in American history where, like, I like to delve into subjects sometimes, and I just recently pretty much just learned a lot about the whole history of the U.S. and all the elections and the politics, and I just hadn't heard about the Act of 1871, and that's another reason why I was intrigued, because it seemed like such a big deal and, had all these implications, but I just hadn't heard about it. So all I wanted to do was just Google Act of 1871 just to see what it was about. And okay, so here we go. So yeah, I thought I would just look at, the Wikipedia page and it would just be a simple thing, but as you can see, there's all these tabs which we're going to go through, so just bear with me, buckle up. But okay, so on the Wikipedia page, it says District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871. And what I found here and in other pages online is something totally different from what I just described to you that I heard in the video. And here, just briefly, it says the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871 is an act of Congress that repealed the individual charters of the cities of Washington and Georgetown and established a new territorial government for the whole District of Columbia. Though Congress repealed the territorial government in 1874, the legislation was the first to create a single municipal government for the federal district. So, I mean, to me, this just seemed kind of boring, to be honest. Like, it just seemed like, the cities of Washington and Georgetown had their own, municipalities or charters. And, this was just like a zoning issue that, now it's just going to be a District of Columbia. Like, it just set up the, contractual status or legal status of the capital as being its own zone. And I read the article, but that's pretty much the gist of it. That there were these cities, Georgetown and Washington, and this just did away with their independence as cities and made them this district. And that sounds pretty mundane. And I think any normal person would be like, okay, well, that solves that. Case closed, and that wasn't particularly interesting, and now we can move on with our lives. But I'm not a normal person, and so I was still curious. Like, I just felt like, I don't know, I just felt like there was more information, and so I looked online and looked for, I don't know, a different alternative. Like, I have to admit, I was looking for that, and that's what I found. So I found a couple of these articles. And I know this doesn't look, to me, this doesn't look like a very legitimate site. It looks a little sketchy, but I was just curious, so I read anyway. And that's what always gets me into trouble. But this says, I'm not going to read the whole thing of this article, but It says, since the Act of 1871, which established the District of Columbia, we have been living under the United States Corporation, all caps, which is owned by certain international bankers and aristocracy of Europe and Britain. In 1871, the Congress changed the name of the original Constitution by changing one word, and that was very significant, as you will read. Some people do not understand that one word or two words difference in any legal document do make the critical difference, but Congress has known and does know this. So you can tell by the writing that this doesn't seem like a very official source of information, but this appears to be generally the narrative that we're talking about. Let's see here. And then I wanted to show it said that they changed one word in the Constitution, and I wanted to just find that here. I don't know if I'll find that, but basically just that the Constitution, the Act of 1871 formed a corporation called the United States. So basically that before 1871, America was a country serving the people, and then after 1871, supposedly because of this law, it was now considered a corporation. And the main difference there is that a corporation serves its own interests, whereas a republic serves the interests of the people. And basically they just said that they just had this complete transition where they had people who were basically acting like representatives who really weren't, or something. Anyway, I found maybe two more articles similar to this, and it only gets weirder from here. It will only get weirder and weirder. But this is from, well, the website domain is mainrepublicmailreport.com, and it's like a forum where different articles are posted, which I'll show you later. But this article is called "The Act of 1871 was repealed by Justice Anna von Reitz," and I thought that was very interesting, and I'm going to talk about that after the article, because Justice Anna von Reitz, I was like, is this a Supreme Court justice? I don't know the names of all the justices, so I don't know, but that just intrigued me, and I did look that up, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But it says the Act of 1871 was indeed passed in 1871, repealed in 1874, then by piecemeal finally revived and passed in 1877, implemented in 1878. And it had precious little to do with us, as it was actually a restructuring of one of the foreign federal subcontractors to better avoid culpability for and to profit from crimes that the same guilty parties had already committed against us. So this is interesting. This sounds conspiratorial. And I don't know, I just find this stuff interesting, so I continued reading. After the Civil War, so you have this whole narrative, this whole story here. After the Civil War, the victorious Union Army that fought for the Northern Confederation reorganized what was left of the federal territorial government to settle the bankruptcy Lincoln started in 1863, which he declared the day after he issued the first ever executive order, General Order 100. And so that was pretty interesting to me. I looked it up, and it turns out you have to avoid some confusion there, because Lincoln did declare bankruptcy for himself prior to 1863, I think, when he was younger, and that has nothing to do with this, so that you have to be careful to distinguish that. But he did issue the first ever executive order. I can look that up real quick. Executive Order 100. Let's do Lincoln. It's called the Liber Code, and it had to do with the, let's see, I know Wikipedia isn't a super solid source of information, but it's just something I can go to for general information. Abraham. Anyway, basically, again, they make it sound like it's very simplified, and it just has to do with the structure of soldiers or their clothing or something, but then it has all these other implications. But anyway, Among other things, prior to the Act of 1871, a Scottish commercial corporation, merely calling itself the United States of America Incorporated, foisted off its corporate articles of incorporation as the Constitution in 1868. So they formed a substitute entity, a foreign commercial corporation, named it after us, and started doing business in our names, impersonating us, and illegally accessing our assets and credit starting in 1868. Blah, blah, blah. This person calls it the switcheroo that took place in 1868. And then it says, in both cases, the actual government was usurped and our assets seized upon illegally and unlawfully via members of the U.S. Congress pretending to represent us, and all operated under conditions of non-disclosure, fraud, breach of trust, and deceit. And to me, that was just kind of interesting because I know that there's, I'm going to forget the term, but there's a legal term which basically means that any land or property is by default owned by the country, basically. So like, whenever there's basically just that when it comes down to it, by default the country just owns all the land and all the property of the entire country, whatever's in this zone geographically. And so, I mean, knowing that, it kind of did make a little bit of sense to me that just that line where our assets were seized upon illegally, because I know that does have a little bit of merit, legally speaking, I think. And then this person, they kind of just go into more detail. The Act of 1871 is a window on the process of this criminality overtaking a foreign subcontractor of ours, but that's hardly our concern. So basically, the idea was that the United States was a republic from 1776 or 1780 or whenever it started, whenever it was ratified or certified, validated, but it was a republic up until 1868 or 1871 or whenever this was. It seems like it started and then stopped, according to this person, and was almost like a struggle to get this transition going after the Civil War that took like 1 or 2 decades. But that basically this is describing this transition from a republic to a corporation, and the big difference here, the difference in wording in the Constitution, is that before we had states which were all part of a republic, which we are taught that we still have, but this says that basically after this transition that the states weren't sovereign, that there was just one country. Washington, D.C. had its own government, which even Wikipedia says that this established a government for the whole District of Columbia. So it implies that the District of Columbia is sovereign from the rest of the country, that it's its own city-state, which rules over the other states like franchises, as one person put it. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that that's all 100% accurate. I'm just trying to learn like this narrative or this version of the story which we're not told, and just understand like what this narrative is, basically, whether it's true or not, because it just seems like an interesting, to me, just with my like somewhat limited knowledge of history, it seems to kind of check out, that the North was bankrupt after the Civil War. And I also know that the Rothschilds, and to get a little bit conspiratorial, these very wealthy elite families from Europe are known to fund both sides of wars and to even instigate wars just for the purpose of giving out loans during those wars and making huge profits off the interest, even like bankrupting countries sometimes. They did this with pretty much every major European war. If you go back and look at like who's funding each side of the war, it's like the same not royal, but the same elite families funding both sides. So knowing all that, it wouldn't really surprise me to know that the Rothschilds or similar families might have instigated the Civil War, or if they didn't instigate it, they at least profited off of it vastly. And according to this narrative, it was to the extent that the North was just bankrupt and that they basically, in a way, sold off the country. Okay, but so I said Justice Anna von Reitz. I said I was going to come back to that name. So, like I said, Yeah, I was very interested in that. I'm like, is that actually a justice? I haven't heard of that person. Is that a previous justice? Because justices are pretty big. Like, that would be a pretty big deal if that person is just writing these articles. So I looked up Justice Von Rights. Well, first I looked into this website, and there's different articles. Like the one I just read, it says it's by Justice Anna Von Rights, but it's posted by David Robinson. And that's a common theme in these articles that are posted on this forum or this website, where it's David Robinson posting them, but most of them are by Justice or Judge. Like here it says Judge Anna Von Rights, but she seems to be the main contributor to this website. And again, it's kind of weird that are you a justice or a judge? I'm confused because it said both, but and then also Big Lake, Alaska. So this one, so there's a whole bunch of them, but this one says the Federation and the Federal Republic by Judge Anna Von Rights, Big Lake, Alaska. I have been called an obstructionist by those seeking to resurrect the long vanishing Federal Republic. I earned that moniker because I had the temerity to point out an obvious truth. Okay, so just from that sample, I noticed like several weird things about just several weird things. Okay, the first is, again, like I said, are you a justice or a judge? I'm confused. Second thing, I'm from Alaska, so I know, like, I haven't lived there for most of my life, but I know enough about Alaska to know that it's very rural, it's very unpopulated, as you might suspect. The really only major towns of any notability would be like Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau, since Juneau's the capital. So, I mean, the idea that there would be a judge, let alone a justice, living anywhere in Alaska except those like major towns would be unlikely to me. Like, I don't think these towns would even have judges. I don't know where Big Lake, Alaska is, but anywhere outside of those three places I named would be very small towns. So I just can't imagine that they would have a judge, let alone a justice, living there. The other thing I thought was strange was I was just wondering who is this person, and I have to admit, I was a little bit impressed by their vocabulary. Like the word temerity, I've never heard that word before, ever. And, like as a kid, I read a lot, so I would encounter, words of a pretty big vocabulary, I'd like to think. But, yeah, I've never seen the word temerity at all. And I actually looked that up, and it means excessive confidence or boldness, audacity. And the way that she used it, because I had the temerity or the audacity to point out an obvious truth, I mean, that flows pretty well. So it makes me think that she's not the kind of person to just purposely look up big words just to sound smart. The way she used it looks like she actually has a pretty impressive vocabulary. So that just got me more intrigued about like who is this person. So I looked up to see if I could find more information about this judge or Justice Anna Von Rights. And so first I looked at, I know you can see this page, but first I looked at the Wikipedia page. I looked for a Wikipedia page about her. There is none. There's no Wikipedia page that I could find about this person at all. So I thought that was a little strange. And the only real information I could find her was this video, which is kind of like an expose saying that this is not a real judge. In this video, I'm not going to play it, but just to summarize, this person says that they looked at the record of all the current and past judges in Alaska, and there is no Anna Von Rights. There's no one with that name that is or has been a judge in living memory whatsoever. And so I mean, so this just gets weird. Like, this person appears to be fake, and I don't think this is just another article which I found by this person, and here's supposedly a picture of her, but and I mean, again, it's pretty well written, and the information to me seems like this person is apparently lying about their identity, creating some kind of fictitious identity, and I don't think that fact alone completely disregards the authenticity of the information. Like, I don't think she just made all this up, or he or whoever this is. I don't think they just made this up because it's pretty detailed. And again, I'm not saying it's completely accurate or completely inaccurate, or maybe part of it's accurate, part of it's inaccurate. Either way, I don't think someone would just make this up. You know what I mean? Because it just seems pretty elaborate. But at the end of the day, I don't know who this person is or what exactly their intention is or why they lied about their name. or if their information is accurate or not. And I honestly didn't really find the answer to any of those quandaries, but I just thought it was interesting. So unfortunately, that kind of ends with an open ending. But yeah, here this article is about pretty much the same thing, the same narrative, which I sort of outlined about just how this country isn't what we thought it was, and that legally speaking, it might not even be a country. And I mean, the idea of that, again, like for several reasons, it does have some kind of weight in my mind, just because I know Abraham Lincoln was a lawyer before he was a president or before he was a politician. And so, I mean, this seems very much about, very much a legal issue, or an issue of the legal status of the entity that is the United States. You know, seems like a very legal issue to me. So I was like, I don't know, I guess Lincoln was a lawyer, so that would make maybe some sense. Okay, this is just another just a different article, just outlining pretty much the same narrative. And again, it doesn't look super up to date, but you know, apparently for whatever reason, this is an idea which has caught on with multiple people. Again, that doesn't make it accurate, but it's just interesting to me that this seems like a semi-prevalent idea. Okay, and then we're getting there. We're almost done. Sort of. Kind of, maybe not really. But, okay, and then the last article I want to talk about, which talks about this narrative, I actually want to read, if you have the patience for that. Just because this person I thought was the most articulate and did the best job. You know, this article is the most interesting to me. And this is by Patrick Herbert, which, if you know from the last video, that's where I got that site about the COVID study from, was from his site. And this is the article which led me to his site. But I'm very interested about this person and his information for reasons which should become clear. But real quickly, I just wanted to read this article that he wrote. So it's called America is Bankrupt. Here's Why. And this is from the Renegade Tribune. RenegadeTribune.com. So, America is Bankrupt, Here's Why, by Patrick Herbert. The United States, 1754 to 1863. It says, on April 25th, 1863, Lincoln bankrupted a commercial company known as the original United States. Prior to this, Lincoln had formed a Delaware corporation doing business as the United States of America Incorporated in order to continue to keep the wheels of government moving following the departure on March 27, 1861, of 11 congressional delegates that represented the southern states, an action which forcefully adjourned Congress without having established a future date to reconvene. And I want to interject there because, again, like I said earlier, I had this kind of random urge to learn more about the Civil War and United States history in the previous months before now. And something that I learned was, I wanted to look into, you know, was the Civil War just about slavery, or because when I first looked into, you know, specifically what reasons did the southern states secede for, I got an explanation which basically said, like, well, Abraham Lincoln said he was okay with slavery in the South, but the South just seceded anyway, and it made it sound like the South was just like misinformed or just mistaken about Lincoln's intentions or something. And that to me just didn't really seem believable at all, because I mean, that just seems like such a simple explanation, and I don't think that these states would just secede and start this whole big war just over some simple mistake like that. I mean, it's possible, but it seems unlikely to me. But the more I looked into it, the more it seemed that it was very complicated leading up to the Civil War, and it's hard to say. But one thing I wanted to mention is that, so South Carolina was the state which initiated the, they were the first state to separate from the Union, basically, which started the Civil War. But their reasoning, I read their Declaration of Independence, their version of the Declaration of Independence, sort of, and they basically said that, the United States was sort of like a legal contract, and in any contract, whenever one party fails to meet the guidelines that are outlined in the contract, it basically means that the contract is void, which frees any other parties from any obligations of the contract. And because there were many laws which the northern states had broken, mainly there was a law which stated that any property or persons, because at the time slaves were considered property, but any property which made its way to the north was to be returned to the south. And basically, the northern states didn't want to enforce that rule, whether they thought slavery was morally or ethically wrong, or they just didn't like the South, or whatever. There was a lot of tension and friction between the northern states and the southern states, obviously, and that led the North to not. Like, these laws were passed to sort of compromise between the North and the South, but the North wasn't enforcing or following these laws. And so South Carolina basically said that, well, because they didn't follow the laws, that means this whole contract is obsolete. Therefore, we don't have to be a part of this union anymore. And it does say in the original Constitution that if peoples, for whatever reason, are unhappy with the current situation when it comes to the country, that they do have the right to declare their own independence. Like, it does say that in the Constitution, and that fact alone, along with just the legal reasoning, made me think that there was an argument there that maybe the South or South Carolina did have some kind of legal argument for their sovereignty. So anyway, that was a long interjection, but basically I was just saying that, I mean, okay, just to continue this sort of digression a little bit further, if you take that and apply it to the 2020 election, if for example there were states that betrayed their own laws regarding how voting was to be done, which they did, then that would theoretically mean that they violated the contract which they had agreed to in terms of the organization of the country. And because of that, that would free any other states of their... That would basically mean that the entire foundation of what this country is and the contractual obligation that the states have to the country is basically void, and that basically gives any state a good legal argument for their splitting from the country, basically. Like, hopefully that makes sense. I explained that accurately. But yeah, if you take that reasoning and apply it to 2020, then apparently that's what's happened with Texas. That Texas and some other states, and it's hard to tell because there's so much information surrounding this that I don't know exactly what's accurate and what's not accurate. But there is that potentiality that states could split off, and that's why, like, you have to be careful when states start breaking laws. It's a really big deal. Anyway, okay, so it says the United States of America, Inc. would claim to be a successor to the commercial company known as the United States. However, there is never any contract binding the original United States to any successor corporation. Lincoln essentially substituted his corporation as a successor trustee, with the remaining members of Congress acting as a corporate board of directors. So again, this is kind of outlining that the members of Congress are no longer what they appear to be, that they're actually like members of a corporation, just kind of acting like they're representing the people. And on the one hand, that might sound very conspiratorial and maybe a little bit far-fetched, but on the other hand, that certainly would make sense when you take into account how members of Congress do seem to be operating according to standards other than representing what's best for the people. I mean, I don't think that should even be really a subject of debate. I think just people were so unhappy with the status quo under Bush, and then the other Bush, and Clinton, and even Obama, after we saw what his policies were. I just think that people, like the war in Iraq, for example, most people didn't want to be in Iraq. Like, most people didn't want to support the military being in all these countries, and yet we were anyway. And I think that I thought that even back then that was an example showing that this republic isn't serving the people. It's serving something else. It's serving the interests of politicians, or, that they're essentially representing something else. And so that's why I do give ideas like this some credit or some time to at least learn about them, because the narrative that we're given, that these people represent our own interests just seems to me to be completely wrong. So anyway, on April 24th, 1863, Lincoln issued General Order 100, placing the Grand Army of the Republic in charge of the fate of the nation. I don't know exactly what that means, and he doesn't clarify. But and then on April 25th, 1863, Lincoln bankrupted the original United States. And I looked for that, and it was hard to find much information about that. Which doesn't, to me, necessarily mean it's wrong, but I just thought I'd mention that. By the time the armistice is signed in April 1865, war had ravaged the country. The southern states were in ruins and under military occupation, and the northern states were bankrupt, which again to me seems kind of likely. With the original Congress of the Constitution having been dissolved and replaced by a Congress acting as a corporate board of directors, operating a private for-profit commercial corporation called the United States of America, Inc., the period of 1867 to 1868 and the passing of the Reconstruction Acts were a time of great deceit. And again, this doesn't seem super unlikely to me because I think American history, but especially the Civil War in particular, are a lot more complicated than we'd like to believe, I guess. The corporate Congress engaged in the creation of 5 military districts in 10 southern states and allowed the military district commanders to appoint judges to run civil tribunals, essentially creating a form of law called Special Admiralty, which is not and has not been authorized by the Constitution. So that basically the Congress just did all this, and they didn't ask, for the vote of the people or for the ratification by the states, or they didn't ask anybody's permission. They were just like, this is what we're doing, deal with it. To this day, the identification of this court is to be found by the presence of a gold-fringed star and stripes with the judge acting as the captain or master of the ship or enclave. In 1868, the same corporate... This might get a little tedious. Hopefully you stay with me. But in 1868, the same Congress proceeded to publish its corporate articles as a deceptive look-alike and sound-alike constitution. So again, they're just basically like copying everything that we had before, making it seem like it's the same process, but making some key changes where there's a 100% shift in the power dynamic, where it's top-down instead of bottom-up. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And again, I'm still not saying that that's 100% the truth. I'm just saying, you can't dismiss information without understanding it first. The title was purposely given a similar name to the original Constitution, where the original Constitution... Oh, this is what I was trying to find in the other article. The wording change, which is subtle, but also very... has a lot of ramifications. Very impacting. Where the original Constitution by the Founding Fathers was called the Constitution for the United States of America, and the lower U in United States is intentional, because it's the United States. The United States is not one thing, it's multiple things. Today the United States is one thing, it's one country. Back then the United States was a group of states. So it's kind of a, what's the word? It's just a difference in wording, but it's also a kind of big deal here. So where the original Constitution was called the Constitution for the United States of America, the new document was called the Constitution of the United States of America, and it was written in similar tone and language as the original. So the only two differences there are the U is lowercase in the first one and capital in the second one. And then in the first one is the Constitution for the United States, and in the second one is the Constitution of the United States. And again, so the two differences basically means that before you had a group of states, now it's just one country. And before the Constitution was serving the people, now it's of the people, it's ruling over the people. With this new corporate charter, the articles and bylaws of this new commercial corporation no longer required any ratification of amendments by the states. This is a key point. This paved the way for the unratified 14th Amendment to be born into law by a simple proclamation of it having been passed in 1868. So again, no one voted on the 14th Amendment. The states didn't vote on it. The states apparently just don't vote on things anymore. Congress just said, oh yeah, we have this amendment. And that's just that. We have this amendment now, so everybody deal with it. And, I'm going to talk about the 14th Amendment more in a bit because I it's been a while since I've been in a history class, so I kind of had to refresh my memory on that. But I'm going to talk about that in a second, so don't forget that. That the idea that at this time Congress just rolled out this 14th Amendment, and that it's maybe not what we thought it was. So with this new corporate charter, the articles and bylaws... Yeah, okay, I just read that. Okay, the 14th Amendment was designed to establish the underlying debt of the government to the international bankers. From then on, every person born was born into private corporate limited liability as a corporate entity called a citizen of the United States. And the banks established maritime salvage liens against every man, woman, child, all land, and every business in America. So basically, the government just owns everything. It owns every man, woman, and child. It owns all the land, all the property, everything. Which, again, legally kind of makes a little bit of sense to me. The United States of America, Inc., 1868 through 1933. And this gets even more sad to me, honestly, but in February 1871, the corporate Congress formed a corporation, commercial agency, and government for the District of Columbia. With this, Congress declared itself to be the successor of all United States corporations and the property of all said corporations, claiming complete ownership of every corporation in America. This claim extends to all the natural-born inhabitants, now called citizens, and all of their assets. Not content with the semantic deceit. Yes, semantic. That's the word I was trying to think of earlier. Yeah, it's very semantic, so it's just a simple change of words, but with big implications. Not content with the semantic deceit wrought by both the new corporate charter posing as the Constitution and the Act of 1871, which created a separate foreign government in the 10 square mile parcel of land known as Washington, D.C., the corporate Congress sought to legitimize itself through the creation of a separate nation using federal territories and possessions as states, complete with their land jurisdictions. The permission for this was derived from a series of Supreme Court cases known as the Insular Tariff cases. And again, like, who makes this stuff up? Like, I'm not necessarily saying every part of it is accurate, but I don't think somebody just dreamed this up. Like, you'd have to be kind of a genius, fantasy, historical fantasy writer to come up with all this. And again, I'm not saying that means that it's all accurate. I'm just saying I don't think someone just made it up out of thin air. This union of states operating as the United States of America Minor in place of the continental United States is composed of Guam, Puerto Rico, and American Samoa. By 1912, the bonds that were owned by the bankers, keeping the government funded, came due, and by that time, a strategy was already well underway by European banking interests to gain exclusive control of the money supply for the government with a private, commercial, and mostly foreign-owned association called the Federal Reserve. And hopefully, I don't know who's all watching this, but hopefully you're awake enough, and if not, it's okay. But the Federal Reserve is definitely not federal, and that's something that I think a lot of people have learned in recent years that, like it says here, I can vouch for that it's not the Federal Reserve is not a federal reserve. It's not owned by the people. It's not even a government institution. It's a private entity. It's a private entity which prints out all our money, and that has, again, a lot of implications. And it's extremely corrupt. And they named it the Federal Reserve to be misleading on purpose. But anyway, this is so. And I also want to say that, if you don't understand this, I don't want to blame people. I just want to put this information out there. It's not our fault that we don't know what's going on, because we've been lied to such a ridiculous extent that, of course you have people with ridiculous conspiracy theories. Of course you have people arguing and people confused. We're just trying to figure out what's going on, and we've been lied to on a massive scale. So anyway, no guilt to people who don't know what's going on, because this is not our fault. This association brought the United States of America, Inc. and all of its state franchises and agencies. The use of the word federal in the title was for the purposes of deceiving the population into believing that the bank was a part of the federal government. The Federal Reserve Act was signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson, one of my least favorite presidents, by the way, without being ratified by any state in 1913. So I guess you can kind of see that this is speaking my language. I have some knowledge of this already, and maybe you do too. But in response to this, Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh famously said, "From now on, depressions will be scientifically created." So basically, what that means is that, like the reasoning to pass the Federal Reserve was supposedly it was supposedly to prevent economic crashes from happening. But if you know history at all, it was passed in 1913, and we had the Great Depression only, what, 15 years later or 18 years? Don't make me do math. But yeah, we had like the biggest economic depression of United States history, just less than a couple decades after making this Federal Reserve, which was supposedly made to prevent that from happening, but actually did the exact opposite. And it's just my experience where a lot of these political policies are passed saying that they're going to do one thing, but then the effects of it is that they actually do the exact opposite. And whether that's by design or happenstance is up for debate. But I would argue that these people know what they're doing and that they're purposely being deceptive. Anyway, okay, let's get through this. I think we're almost there. Just hold on. In 1917, the corporate Congress, acting in accord with their international banking bosses, conscripted all private property in America through the passing of the War Powers Act. Prior to this time, there's never been any mention of anything called war powers or any avenue that could be pursued that would entitle any government entity to the private possessions of every man, woman, and child in America for military use. Yeah, again, the idea that they can just demand that people go to war, that kind of shows that the people are the property of the government, and it didn't used to be that way. This was an illegal and unconstitutional power grab. And again, it seems like, according to this, the government kind of just made this act up because there was no way that they could really bend the rules you can't just bend the rules to suddenly say that you own everything. That's pretty drastic. So they just kind of made it up. And again, usually they'll use a crisis as a reasoning for having to do this, like, war powers. So I would sort of presume that, we only have to do this because of war, that, we have to force people to join the war because of this crisis. But it's really just a devious way it's an unconstitutional power grab, like this says. Following the cessation of military involvement in the First World War, the corporate Congress and various presidents continued to declare states of emergency. Yeah, this is kind of what I just said. And states of war in order to retain control of all assets belonging to the state and state citizens. And yeah, and if you look at the states of emergency and states of war, if you just look at the history of it, it's been very rare and uncommon for us to not be in a state of war or state of emergency. And it's actually been more common for us to be in like multiple states of emergency at the same time. And that's ubiquitous with pretty much all the recent presidents. And again, this is part of the reason why, because under states of emergency, the government has more control to do things. And so, of course, they're always inventing or just conveniently capitalizing off of different crises, and that give them the authority to do this. It is for this reason that the United States of America Inc. would be in possession of these assets when bankruptcy would eventually be declared in 1933. And that's why I said it gets really sad, because really America was only an independent republic. According to this theory, America was only an independent republic for like less than 100 years, from the 1770s or 1780s up till the 1871, I guess. And then after that, it became a corporation, and it went bankrupt again, and then was just sold in 1933. So only an independent functioning republic for less than 100 years, then becomes a corrupt corporation, and then becomes a sold bankrupt corrupt corporation in 1933. And again, this just made sense to me, like what I've learned about President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was always kind of a power-hungry president. That was my perspective on him. And so to me, it's like, I was like, yeah, he seems like he would do that type of thing. Leading up to this bankruptcy was a boom And also for anyone who's like defending FDR, saying, "Oh well, he helped us out of the Great Depression." It took us like 20 years to get out of the Great Depression. I think it started in 1929, and the economy didn't really improve till World War II, so like 1942 or three. So it took us over 10 years to get us out of the Great Depression. I don't think that's like a success by any means, and I've heard economists say that we could have been out of it much sooner. Like, so yeah, so I just think FDR's reputation is a little bit questionable, and I'm willing to debate anyone on that to an extent. But okay, leading up to this bankruptcy was a boom known as the Roaring Twenties. The 1920s saw massive leveraged investment speculation as the Federal Reserve was excessively printing money, with the bankers allowing markets to build along with a comfortable population making increasingly risky investments, hoping for a fortune in an overvalued market. And does that sound familiar to you? Because to me, that sounds like kind of like what's happening right now with the government just printing out money like crazy, and people investing in very risky assets at this current time, which is a little bit nerve-wracking. But yeah, this is basically saying that the Great Depression was artificial. It was created. That the economic success of the 1920s was basically fake and created by inflation. And that's what led to the Great Depression, the stock market crash of 1929. And this was all just a power grab. In 1929, the Federal Reserve abruptly and purposely cut off the money supply, and as a result triggered a depression. Businesses were closed and real estate prices dropped. And what's really sick is that they always blame this on the big companies. And so not only do they do a power grab in order to make this happen, but then once it happens, then that allows them more of an opportunity to do a power grab. So after that, you have FDR saying that, oh, well, this was free market capitalism's fault, and that the answer is that the government has to own more of everything. And so you get the government just, or in this case, the Federal Reserve, which is like this whole corruption basically just gets more and more power, and then causes crises, and then uses those to get more power, and it's just this terrible cycle. But I want to say, like, this is kind of depressing, but I am an optimist. I just think that sometimes you have to learn about these kind of like bitter truths or bitter narratives and just see what kind of checks out as the most accurate. And the only way that you're going to improve any situation is by realizing like how bad it is to begin with, and accepting it. Anyway, see how much. Yeah, we're almost done. I've got like a couple paragraphs, so just bear with me. We're almost there. The bankers, however, were positioned to benefit from this fallout immensely and make a tremendous amount of real estate acquisitions for pennies. And I know that. I mean, we've seen that in recent economic depressions, that the bankers just gobble up everything for low prices once that happens. And we've seen in 2008. People do this on purpose. And so I don't think this is really a conspiratorial thing. I think that it's pretty strongly evident in history, if you just look at look at facts that are commonly accepted by, the official narrative. Okay, at this same time, the U.S. Treasury was paying interest to the Federal Reserve Corporation in gold certificates, coin, and bullion that were then shipped off to the European banks controlled by the elite. By 1933, the Treasury was drained and the government was insolvent. So we're just bankrupted over and over again. It's so sad. On March 6, 1933, Roosevelt proclaimed the bankruptcy of the United States of America, Inc. Again. And it's interesting that Roosevelt and Lincoln are seen as like such great presidents, which, I don't think things are really that simple necessarily. The 14th Amendment had, and this brings us back to the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment had established a citizen of the United States, that all governors of 48 federal state franchises pledged the good faith and credit of as an asset to finance the Chapter 11 reorganization expenses and pay interest in perpetuity to the creditors on the national debt, which we should all be familiar of because we're always paying this national debt, which has no end in sight and never has apparently. But conveniently, the 14th Amendment states that the payment of this debt shall not be questioned. And I thought that was pretty funny, and I looked it up, and it's actually in there, and I can show you that in a second. The creditors, of course, were the Federal Reserve bankers. And yeah, so that was just a lot of information. And to me, like, even just listening to it as a story and not necessarily believing it, I was just kind of like, it's just an interesting narrative of American history, which we don't usually get. And to me, it sounded interesting, and it kind of made sense with a lot of what I already know about American history. And again, I'm not a historian, I'm not an expert. I'm just someone who looks into stuff like this. And to me, it just made sense. So I just thought it was kind of interesting. And again, I'm not saying 100% of it's accurate. I just thought it was interesting and worth sharing. I also thought this was interesting. So at the end it says, Patrick Herbert is a software engineer, researcher, and writer who currently resides in Texas. He has been through some remarkable metaphysical experiences that led to a spiritual awakening and is actively pursuing ways to help to raise the awareness of others with regards to the elements of what we call the global conspiracy and how it affects all of our lives regardless of political disposition. Visit his website at patrickherbert.org. And that's where I found his website, which is right here. It has this quote saying, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. I don't know who that is, but interesting quote. And that has these articles. And that's where I found the one about COVID, and that's where what I shared, and I said I'd find that. But, okay, so we're almost done here. Last part of this video, I just wanted to say, yeah, there were some interesting things about the 14th Amendment there, and like I said earlier, I had vaguely heard of the 14th Amendment in history a long time ago, and just wanted to brush up on that. So, and I'm not satisfied with people telling me what a document is about. I like to just look at the actual document because that's the only way you can get like an objective view, really, in my opinion. Okay, so more reading. So hopefully this isn't too tedious, but I won't read all of it. I might just skim it. And basically, first off, like if you do look at, if you just ask, like, what is the 14th Amendment about? And ask people to summarize it for you, they'll just say like, oh, well, it basically just made black people citizens and like helped prior slaves before the Civil War have the right to vote. And it's like, how could you be against that? That sounds great. The 14th Amendment is awesome, and there's nothing else to say about it. But reading the actual document just made it seem a little bit more complicated, and it seemed honestly to kind of corroborate with what with what Patrick Herbert was saying. So it says all persons born or naturalized in the United States, and I've noticed in these documents they often have really long run-on sentences, and I think that's on purpose to make people not understand very easily. I mean, the way it's written is so unclear to me, but like I understand it, but it's very difficult to understand. So section 1, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor denied to any person within its jurisdiction to the equal protection of the laws. So that sounds nice and kind of fluffy until you kind of think about it critically. I mean, and I'm used to people passing policies which sound really great. You know, they purposely say, oh, we're just trying to help everyone have, you know, life, liberty, and property. So how could you be against that? But the beginning is the part which is a little bit more problematic, where it says, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. So first it says everyone's basically only in allegiance to the United States as a country, and not to the states at all. So to me, although it sounds like it's just nice and fluffy, to me this is basically saying the states have no rights whatsoever, pretty much. The states can't really pass any laws about people at all, protecting or going against them or anything. And basically, everyone's only allegiance is just to the country called the United States of America. I mean, that's to me what it sounds like. This kind of goes into detail about how this is to be done. Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states to their respective members. So it's basically setting up a new structure where the federal government is just in charge of everyone, where we are all just citizens of the United States as a country. We're not citizens of our states in any meaningful way. We don't have to follow their laws. Their laws are like an afterthought compared to the federal laws, basically. So this to me is just a huge thing saying that the federal government has all this power, and it makes sense to me in the context of the Civil War because, yeah, the southern states did want slavery, but at the same time, a lot of it was about states' rights as well. You can't say it was about, like, they both were just coupled. And so to me, like, a lot of what the Civil War was about the North, about the country as a whole getting more and more power and denying the states the power. And like, the southern states didn't just want slavery, they also wanted to be independent states like they were before, whereas what they were fighting against in the North was just a collective one country system. So to me, with that context put in mind, this kind of just makes sense that after the Civil War, the federal government was like, okay, we won, so like we have all the power now, the states have no power. We're gonna make it sound like we're just protecting people's rights, but actually we own everything now, kind of, in a way. Okay, I'm not gonna read the rest of that. I don't think it's super important for this purpose. Oh, and then this was interesting too. Section 3, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office civil. So basically, like, you're not going to be anybody. You're not going to be shit. If, let me make sense of this. If you having, no person will be basically any of these things if they have had previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States. Again, this is a really long run-on sentence. Or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. Okay, so that was a really long mouthful, but basically to me what it means is anyone who was involved in the Civil War at all, like if you were a governor of one of the states that seceded, or if you were involved in any way against the, on the other side of that war, you aren't going to have any say in anything now. You are expelled. Like, we won, you lost, you have no power, no one, you're not going to be any politician at all. You're not going to take an oath again. You're done. And so, yeah, so again, to me, this is kind of just can't be separated from the context of the Civil War, where they're saying the North, or not even really the North, but the federal government is saying, we won, so we own everything. And anyone who is against us, you're exiled. You're done. And again, this is all done under the guise of protecting individual liberties, when the reality couldn't be farther from the truth. It's actually the opposite. And so often these legal situations are like, or these political situations are the exact opposite of what they present themselves to be. They present themselves to be, oh, we want everyone, each individual, to have more power and more, we just want to protect people voting and everything. But the reality is we're actually getting much less freedom as a whole, and the states were basically losing all their rights to the federal government in this power grab. Anyway, Section 4, the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts. And what does this have to do with black people voting or previous slaves voting? Okay, again, I want to say, if the 14th Amendment is just about that, explain why are we talking about public debt now. But the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. Okay, boom. That's exactly what this person, Patrick Turbert, said that it said, which kind of makes me think that he's right about some other stuff too. I mean, that's so crazy to write a law where it's like, oh yeah, any payments we had whatsoever during the Civil War basically aren't to be questioned. So any debt we had at all, don't even bother looking into it, because that's just our business and not yours. Okay, wait a minute, but I thought if the common people are represented by the government and the government represents us, don't we have the right to know where our tax dollars went to, and like how would you have the audacity to say that just don't bother looking into it, don't question it? I mean, that was just crazy to me that they would even say that there, and that was actually corroborated by this Patrick Herbert person. And then it ends. Okay, section 4 ends by saying, "But neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim for the loss of emancipation for any slave. But all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void." Okay. Section 5, the Congress shall have power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. So yeah, Congress is just in charge now. Deal with it. And again, just to reiterate what Patrick Herbert said, this no one voted on this. I mean, no citizen, since that's what we're called now, voted on this at all. The states definitely didn't vote on it because the states don't get to have a say now. Congress just said, yeah, this is what we're doing. So, and I want to go further in saying, by saying that this was protecting black rights and just people's rights in general, anyone who is against the 14th Amendment, you could conveniently just say that they're a racist. Oh, you're against black people voting, you just must be a racist. You're a Confederate person. You know, you were from the side that lost, and you're just this old-fashioned racist. And so we're not going to listen to you. It provides a very easy way to clear any dissent at all. It's like, to me, it's a very obvious power grab, kind of like Patrick Herbert was saying. And yeah, just to reiterate, it provides a way to eliminate any dissent whatsoever. So yeah, it's very it's just a power grab. It's like very draconian, I guess you could say. Okay, and that concludes, this is a whole journey I went through, and that concludes that portion, and it actually got weirder after that to some extent, but I don't want to drag you through any more than I already have. So thanks for making it to this portion of the video, if anybody even made it, and hopefully that was interesting. And yeah, I do want to post more astrological videos, more sun moon sign combinations. I do like doing those, but I'm really passionate about learning about new weird theories and information like this, so I'd like to post more of this in the future too. So thanks for watching. I'll see you later.